Hello dear chess friends, I'm International Master Andrey Ostrovskiy and you're welcome to this series of lessons dedicated to the essentials of bishop endgames. And this lesson is dedicated to the basic theory of same-colored bishop endgames. So we start with the positions where the strongest side has the extra pawn, it is the only pawn on the board, and definitely these positions are much more complicated than the similar ones in opposite colored bishops endgames because simply bishops can interact, which means that the strongest side has a lot of chances to win the game. But not in this position that you see on the board right now, because we can notice that king managed to blockade the pawn, and the blockading square is a dark square. White has a light squared bishop, which means it's not possible to kick this king away from this position. And this means white can't really make a progress because there are no zugzwangs, because black also has the bishop, which has almost internal quantity of possibilities to maneuver around the board. So after some tries, we can notice that the main task for black is just not to blunder the bishop. That's it. But at some point, it is, of course, possible just to sacrifice it for a pawn, but it is not really necessary, so it is the obvious draw. Let's have a look at the other position. In this position, we can see that black's king obviously can't blockade white's passed pawn, and the theory of same-colored bishop endgames is mainly focused on the situations like this one, because the previous example showed it was just an obvious draw. It's not really interesting. In this situation, we can see that the square d7 is controlled by the bishop b5. It is the key defendant piece here. So if the pawn passes d7, bishop simply takes it, and it is a draw because a single bishop can't guarantee the win, right? So if it was a opposite colored bishop endgame, of course it was just an obvious draw. But it is the same colored bishop endgame, and white has a chance to change the situation. So the basic method of winning such an endgame is to actually kick the bishop away from this diagonal, or to cover this diagonal for this bishop. So there are only two outcomes usually. So we can notice that if our bishop comes to c6 square, it is the key one in this situation, the bishop will be forced just to go away or to take our bishop, and becoming pawn endgame will be absolutely winning for white. It is the other important method that it is useful to memorize. So when you have an extra pawn in the same colored bishop endgame, usually you can speculate the possibility of getting the pawn endgame, right? So to exchange bishops might be a very, very good idea. So usually the offer of this exchange forces opponent's bishop to go away, and this gives you the time for improving your position, promoting your pawn, and so on. So we will see a lot of these cases during this lesson. So first of all, of course, bishop goes to f3. It is the best square to put your bishop on this diagonal, because from there you just reach your main goal to force opponent's bishop going away somewhere. At the same time, you just don't blockade your own pawn, so you just win the time instead of losing it. Bishop goes to e8. It doesn't really matter if the bishop stays here. Then after bishop c6, black simply can't improve the situation. Let's have a look at this quickly. Bishop a4, bishop goes to c6, closing the diagonal. If bishop takes the bishop, then king takes c6, and it is a winning endgame, of course, because king ensures the promotion of the pawn. And if bishop doesn't take the bishop after bishop c6 and goes away somewhere, then okay, pawn simply goes to d7, and nothing can stop this pawn from getting to d8 square. So after bishop f3, let's say bishop goes to e8, but the same, bishop c6. So there is a threat of exchange, which leads to absolutely winning endgame for white. So black has to make a decision, and both choices that black has, they are to take our bishop, which is losing, we already saw that, and actually going away with the bishop, or even taking this bishop on e8. All these choices are losing ones, so black can't save this position. After bishop h5, pawn goes to d7. After, let's say, bishop takes c6, we already saw it is an absolutely winning endgame. So king goes back to c7, ensuring the promotion. So let's have a look on other examples, and well, they will be much more complicated than these first two ones. If in the previous example, white's pawn was already on the 6th rank, so only 2 squares before promotion, in this situation we can notice that black managed to stop this pawn one step earlier. That, of course, gives black more chances to save the game. But still, in this case, we can see that black's king is far away, so most likely it won't have a chance to help the bishop in the fight with the pawn. And, well, white has great chances to win at first glance. In fact, true, white is just winning with the help of correct maneuvering. So this endgame is not that simple. Once again, white has to use the speculation on this trading bishops to make a progress. So everything starts with a very natural move, bishop c6. So it is a tempo move. Black can't afford exchanging bishops, so the bishop should go away somewhere. Let us start with the bishop e2 move. The bishop has to go away somewhere to be able to stop the pawn using another diagonal. So in this case, bishop goes to d5. So it is a typical maneuver. So bishop started with this move, and now bishop goes here, just closing the initial diagonal, which was occupied by opponent's bishop. And now there is a threat of promoting the pawn, at least pushing it further simply towards the promotion square. So bishop has to go to b5 to stop it. And now white has to find the best square to get rid of this bishop on the new diagonal. Now it is a4, e8. And the best square to do this will be d7 for a natural reason, because being placed on d7, the bishop definitely forces opponent's bishop to lose the time on moving away somewhere, and at the same time, this bishop doesn't blockade the own pawn. So if compared to c6, this position is much, much better. So bishop simply goes to e6. At the moment, black also has some time, and king gets closer. Bishop goes to d7 now. This forces the bishop to go away. We can notice that diagonal h3, c8 is already controlled by white's bishop, so there is no sense to try to occupy it, and the best chance for this bishop is to occupy this small diagonal a6, c8, and now white's pawn simply gets to c7. No questions, white has to do this because this helps white to improve the position dramatically. c6, king goes to d4, now c7. What is next? Black's best chance is to try to get closer to the c7 pawn with the king, right? Because bishop is already pinned to this small diagonal a6, c8. So king goes to c4, trying to perform the maneuver of this kind, like get into b6 square or maybe b5, b6 when white's bishop goes away somewhere. So what white should do here? Since the bishop occupies this very ugly position on a6, well, the winning plan could be just getting with the own king to b6 square. So b6 becomes kind of critical point. Both sides fight for this square because it is very important. So if white's king gets to b6, it attacks the bishop, and actually this forces the bishop to go away from this position because all the squares on diagonal a6, c8 will be controlled in this case, right? And this means the promotion of the c7 pawn. So immediate king c6 makes no sense because after bishop b5 check, we can notice that the king has to go back, and actually white achieves nothing, right? So white's failure in this line is based on the bad position of the bishop d7, right? So white wants to improve it and plays bishop h3 first. Moreover, it is a smart move because it stops also black's plan of king b5, right? Because if king goes to b5 now, then simply bishop f1 check, takes the bishop a6, and c8 queen. Everything is simple. So to bishop h3, black's king has to use a longer route. It is king to b4, so it takes more time, of course. Now king goes to c6. Now nothing can stop the king from occupying this square. There's already a threat of king b6 just attacking the bishop and forcing the bishop away from the diagonal. King goes to a5. It is the only move. And now we can notice that, well, it is almost a Zugzwang situation. So white simply waits one move, and it is fatal. because if king leaves the control of b6 square, then white's king occupies it and it's over. If bishop goes away from diagonal a6 c8 simply somewhere, then pawn promotes. So probably the only chance for black is to try bishop b5 check, but it is also not that efficient because king goes to b7 now. Black's bishop probably comes back to a6, and now king goes to a7. Again, simply waiting. Black has no useful moves because if king goes to b5, then bishop e2 finishes the deal. So king goes to c6, probably the final trick, because if white takes the bishop, then king takes c7, but now king goes to b8. So as we can see, c8 square is controlled, c7 pawn is protected, bishop can't take white's bishop because of c8. And finally, if bishop goes to b7, then bishop f3 wins this bishop. So as you can see, it is kind of basic endgame, but quite complicated one. A lot of different methods, techniques, and very important information. So the basic thing that you should remember about it is finding the best square for your bishop to cover the diagonal or to kick opponent's bishop away, right? Always try to identify squares like d7 in this example. So it was the best square to kick the bishop away because only this square guaranteed that white didn't lose the time after bishop goes away. So you have to combine kicking the bishop away with winning the time for the promotion of your pawn. That is the point. So opponent's bishop searches for another place to stop your pawn. You just push your pawn towards the promotion square. That is the way of winning the game. And also, when the diagonal for the bishop becomes not that long, it is always useful to check if you can simply attack this bishop like here. So when white's king got to b6 square, it was already over because bishop simply had no enough space and squares to stay on this diagonal. It was forced away, which meant just a promotion of the pawn. So let's have a look on the other example. What distinguishes this position from previous ones is that black's king plays an active role in the fight. So it helps the bishop to fight against white's passed pawn. And this appears just a decisive factor because let's imagine the best square of covering diagonal a4, e8, so that the bishop can kick opponent's bishop away from this diagonal and at the same time not to blockade the own pawn. So definitely it is the c6 square, but we can notice that this k square is now controlled twice by the bishop and by the king. So white actually has no this great method of winning the time. This means black has enough time to maneuver the bishop from one diagonal to another. Let's just have a look. So bishop goes to g4. So the best that white can do here is, of course, to try d7 square to kick this bishop away from the diagonal. Okay, bishop goes away, just waiting a bit. So it still occupies the same diagonal, controlling d7 square. Bishop goes to d7. And now the bishop has to change the diagonal to be able to stop the pawn from another one. Another one is, of course, h3, c8. So bishop goes to d1, for example. It is also possible to occupy c2 square. Bishop goes to c6, creating a threat of d7, and bishop goes to g4. So as we can see, white actually can't make a progress. So white can dance around this d7 square, c6 square, but it leads to nowhere. So let's have a look. Bishop d7, bishop d1, bishop f5, bishop a4, bishop d7, bishop d1, bishop c6, bishop g4. Well, white can try, for instance, to wait a bit. Bishop b7. But this, again, gives white nothing because here the great position of the king simply matters and it changes everything. So bishop b7 in any other position would be designed for playing bishop c8, right? Just the best square to kick away the bishop of black from this diagonal h3, c8, not blockading the own d6 pawn. But a big problem for white here is that this method is no longer efficient since king c5 attacks d6 pawn. So after bishop c8, it is possible just to take this bishop. And after king takes c8, king takes d6. So that is a big difference between previous examples and this one. So this initial position with the active king attacking opponent's pawn and controlling the square c6 directly and indirectly leaving white without the possibility to occupy c8 square when black's bishop is on diagonal h3. c8 makes this position absolutely drawish. It is the basic drawish pattern that is important to memorize and to use during the game. So when you have a chance to leave your king passive somewhere on the king side or queen side, depending on where opponent's king is and his pawn, and actually you have a possibility of occupying the active position like this one with the king, of course you have to try to activate your king, because only this helps you to survive this sort of endgames. Never forget, it is not opposite colored bishop endgame. It is the same color bishop endgame, so your bishop can be challenged. So your king has to help your bishop to fight with opponent's pawn, and opponents tries to cover the diagonal and to kick your bishop away from controlling the square of promotion. Thanks for your attention. See you next lessons.